This is the 94.7 FM, The Word Book Club, and we're welcoming the author of Handling Allegations in a Ministry, a really important book for churches, for ministries, and it's far more wide-ranging than you might think. The author is Teresa Lynn Sidebotham, and she's my guest here on the book club. Teresa, thank you for coming and being with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
You are the founder of Teleos Law and author of the book Handling Allegations in a Ministry, Responses and Investigations. In order to get kind of a background to the book, first of all, if you don't mind, tell us about Teleos Law and your own background.
So my background, I grew up as a missionary kid, met my husband at Wheaton College. He was in the Army for a while, so I was a military wife. Then we went to the mission field. We have four sons, the last of whom was born over there. And we came back to the States. I went back to law school as somewhat of a second career, but having had so much ministry experience, it was natural that we went into law. I went into law working with ministries, founded Teleos Law about 12 years ago. And although we do work with businesses and individuals, the bulk of our clients are ministries. And most of what we do is help with the people issues, child protection, workplace issues, all kinds of misconduct and responses. And we see that as our way of helping to build the kingdom of God. If you can handle those problems well, you can have a great testimony.
And I tell you, I read your book. I was very enthusiastic reading your book. It's more than just if you have a lawsuit over how you're, from a church standpoint, how you are letting people use your facility, or if you're having a lawsuit of some problem within your congregation. You really have a full-orbed look at protecting the harmed, people who are harmed, dealing with Matthew 18 issues, and I do want to talk to you about that, because my experience, whenever I've seen somebody threaten Matthew 18, they use that as a threat rather than an opportunity for reconciliation. So you go beyond that, all in the book here. Can you give us a kind of an overview from the author's standpoint of the stuff you have in your book and why you included those things?
Sure. So, obviously I'm an attorney, so, we're not going to ignore the legal side. But more important to us as believers is, are we really living righteously? Are we living the way God's called us to live? And so that means leaders acting the way they should. That means keeping the vulnerable safe, especially children and other people who may have less power. That means that we have a heart for people who've been harmed. We respond well. It also means we bring justice if someone's been accused. So there's so many different values that we have to think about. And the book tries to walk you through, okay, how do you first respond if there's been an allegation? Do you need to make a law enforcement report? Do you need to have a safety plan for people? How do you set up some kind of inquiry or investigation? How is it going to be fair to the person accused? How are you going to keep safe the people who may have been harmed? And we just walk from there step by step, trying to, address those different values and take care of those different interests in a godly way.
And as I say, I was very enthusiastic when I read the book, because it does really present allegations with a heart. And so many times, even those of us in ministry, those of us in church ministry, it's somehow once allegations come up, we get into the fight mode, you know, and we forget the heart. And I really appreciate the heart that you presented throughout. The book is Handling Allegations. I just want to say to people who are viewing this or who are listening to it on the radio, I think every church, every pastor, every elder, every person who is in a leadership capacity in a church or in a ministry really should buy this book. I think it's that important, and it's that far-ranging. The book is entitled "Handling Allegations." So I want to start with the word allegations. Allegations, whether it's a church or a ministry or any other organization, allegations are a given, right?
They're going to happen anytime you've got groups of people together, working together over a period of time. Someone's either going to do something wrong or somebody else is going to think that someone's done something wrong. And it could be something really mild, like an inappropriate comment. It could be something really severe, like child sexual abuse. But they're going to happen. And, speaking of heart, most people in ministry have a great heart, but they're not really trained to handle this kind of thing. And when you get an allegation, the first reaction is shock, maybe disbelief, maybe fear. And in the midst of that crisis, how do you respond well? And if you think of it like, training paramedics or training coaches, they go through first aid classes to say, hey, when the crisis starts, when you see these physical symptoms, what do you do? A, B, C. And, there's these little rituals that they go through. Well, similarly, the book is trying to help to say, when this crisis starts, what do you do first? What do you do next? How do you respond well?
But always be expect them. Yeah,
Exactly.
don't invite them, but
Right.
but expect them and be ready to address them. And your book gives a strong ability to help address and just not dismiss them, which so often happens,
It does.
especially when you're blindsided by them.
And that is one of the intuitive responses, is to say, oh, that couldn't have happened, and just ignore it. And that's actually not a great intuitive response.
Well, let's first look at internal uh, allegations, maybe from what seems like just disunity within the church, or somebody thinking that they said something that was untoward to another person. You cover that in your book as well. And I guess the internal things between members of an organization or probably outnumber the real biggies, like you say. So everybody in authority needs to, if nothing else, understand from your book what to do when those little pesky internal things take place.
And it's true, we all have them. I mean, even in our families, right? If anyone who's been in a family, has been in a church, people say things, feelings get hurt. And some of these things may have some legal consequence. Some of them may just be, rude or insensitive. And there's a lot of ways to deal with conflict, to address it in a Christian way. Unfortunately, so many of us are a little bit conflict avoidant, and we don't address it. And one thing I'd like to mention here, prevention and training is really important to help people be prepared to address things well. So churches, ministries sometimes think, oh, we don't need sexual harassment training because that's not going to happen here. Well, we're not all perfect, and it will happen here. So we respond on the investigative side at Teleus Law, but our Teleus Teaches affiliate is an online training program to help with preventing everything from child abuse to sexual harassment to, insensitive relationships between races. Because how much better to prevent it or to immediately deal with small issues while they're small rather than let the whole thing fester and finally boil up into this huge mess.
And I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned Tellius Teaches. That tell us about what Tellius Teaches is and how people, whether they be in churches or ministries, can avail themselves of specifics uh, through Tellius Teaches.
Telius Teaches is an online subscription-based training program that has some of these major training courses like child protection and sexual harassment, and also a ton of professional development courses around leadership, conflict management, HR, but everything from a scriptural perspective, primarily how is God calling us to live together? How do we look like the body of Christ? If you go to telliusteaches.com, you'll see we've got scads of free resources, articles, blogs, also some free videos that you can get to without having to pay. David Sidebotham does a vlog called Stupid Things People Do and What We Can Learn from Them. And that's actually extremely funny. So you can log in and see those. And I don't think those are actually behind the paywall. If you want continued free resources, go to telliuslaw.com and sign up for our monthly Tellius tip, which will, bring the blog updates and other articles to you every month.
And you have at the end of your book, Handling Allegations in a Ministry, Responses and Allegations, a page with that information, with Tellius Law and how to log on, as well as Tellius Teaches. So you can take that information now, but I recommend that you buy this book, and it's in the back of that book, so that way you have it all in one place. In terms of allegations within the church, you deal with Matthew 18 in your book, and I was so glad to see that because, as I mentioned, I have run into, through friends and a couple experiences in the church that I attended, of Matthew 18, and my experience is it's been threatened as a club rather than the purpose to bring reconciliation and healing. Tell us about your take on Matthew 18 and how you presented it in the book. I think that is so important.
Well, first, I am absolutely for reconciliation and healing, and we've got some exciting things that we do sometimes initially, sometimes after an investigation, people that we work with, and God can do some really amazing things with healing. So that's absolutely our goal. When we think about Matthew 18, a lot of times people are thinking of it at the beginning of a process, right when everything starts. And that may not be appropriate at that point because we may not know enough about what's going on to be there. But in any case, I'll see situations where maybe somebody who's accused of sexually abusing a child says, well, I've got a right to sit down and have a confrontation with this child. And I don't think that's scripturally sound. So the passage says, uh, you know, when your brother has offended, or you go to your brother and work it out. And it uses the word brother in what was at the time a very male-dominated culture. So I think Matthew 18 is great for a discussion between people who are roughly equal. I don't think it was ever intended to be used where there's a power differential. And a couple of examples from scripture where we see this. Ruth did not go to the city gate and sort out her husband's property issues in the remarriage. Boaz went and chatted it out with his brothers at the city gate. When there was the issue with Onesimus, Paul didn't say, well, you go and have a Matthew 18 discussion with Philemon and work this thing out. No, he wrote what's now a book of the Bible to sort out the problems between the slave and slave owner because of the power differential. And so I think there can be facilitated discussions that church leaders have. I know some amazing outside experts who come in and help to facilitate discussions. But the last point I want to make about Matthew 18 is not intended to be a substitute for what God has given the state responsibility for, crime and law enforcement. If the church gets burgled, you don't sit down and have a Matthew 18 discussion with the burglar, probably. If a child gets molested, you better not be sitting down and having a Matthew 18 discussion, because that's a crime against society, and God has given that responsibility to the civil authorities.
As I asked, and then as you responded, it occurs to me from people who might be watching are not familiar with what Matthew 18 is all about. I should probably define it for people. It is an effort to reconcile differences within the congregation in a church setting, and there are several steps involved of efforts to lovingly confront, deal with, as you had said, and if necessary, going through the steps, bringing it before the whole congregation. And that's where the threat comes in so many times, when a person says, well, we're going to bring you to church discipline, and there usually is a furrowed brow with that particular threat, and that's really not the intent of Matthew 18. Did I adequately indicate that to your? Okay, all right. So that's what Matthew 18 is. It deals with problems between brothers and sisters, and you, as you pointed out, Paul and Philemon is a great example about how that difficulty was dealt with. So Matthew 18, your coverage of that is worth the price of the whole book, as far as I'm concerned. It's really good. Are there any other internal allegations? I want to look at external allegations as well, and I also want to look at crimes such as abuse and stuff like that. But are there any other internal allegations that you want to address before we go to the external?
Just to note that the more common ones are probably either harassment and discrimination issues for employees, or child safety issues in terms. Well, actually, I take that back. One we're seeing a lot now is spiritual abuse and toxic abuse of power. So we do see a lot of allegations related to that, and it's all over the map. Sometimes it's absolutely true. Sometimes it's just essentially a personality or theological conflict, and maybe isn't so true.
Mm-hmm. And of course you go through the same steps that you talk about in the Bible. I mean, in the book.
You do,
Yeah.
which I hope follows the Bible as well. But because at the beginning, when there's an allegation, you have no way to know if it's true or not. So you have to assume that it could be true and act accordingly.
Mm-hmm. What about molestation allegations? Let's talk about that, because those are the ones when a leader says, that not here, that's not possible here, but it is possible here.
It is, and we've seen that hundreds of times. And every time someone thinks, oh, it's just in one denomination and not another, then we do see it in another denomination. It's related to human sin, and churches are full of human sinners. So we have to expect that is something that can happen, try to prevent it, and be ready to respond. It's complex because, first, I already mentioned the law enforcement, child protective services side. You've got to make that mandatory report, and then they will do what they do. but there's also issues within the ministry. How are you going to keep everybody safe? Do you need to separate people from each other? Does somebody need to not attend or not be at work for a while? And then, depending on what law enforcement does and sometimes in what they don't do, the ministry may still need to do some kind of investigation and may need to take some disciplinary actions. And then there's the complex problem, which I don't address in the book, but is going to be addressed in the Tullius Teaches courses. What do you do with sex offenders in the church?
Hmm.
So there are just so many complex issues to address. And, we spend a lot of our time at the law firm thinking through these issues.
And I'm really glad you do because I love your service. You mentioned investigation. Uh, that is also a prominent part of your book. As you pointed out when we began the interview, uh, it it's sort of the thing that many times people say they're adverse to confrontation or to checking things out. The first step really has got to be investigating the allegation, whether that's an internal allegation or something that's coming from the outside. Talk a little bit about that because you spend a lot of time in the book on how to investigate, properly investigate.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because if anything has any degree of seriousness, it will need some level of investigation. So, if a kid in the youth group makes an inappropriate remark to another kid, that investigation could take 15 minutes. Did he say it? Did he not say it? Who heard him say it? And that's fairly low level. If it's a workplace, I'm being harassed or discriminated, that can be a little bit more of an investigation. And any HR department in a company also has to deal with that. But a church or ministry has the additional responsibility of creating a culture. Really, I think we want to think about holiness. Are we living as Christians within that culture? So they'll want to respond with maybe some lower level investigation. As allegations get more serious, or as people at a higher level get accused, say a leader in the ministry is accused of some major sexual misconduct. Now we're not only talking about a big investigation, we're probably talking about an external investigation because one, you need the expertise, two, you need people who aren't biased, three, you need to be able to show to the watching world that it's being handled by people who aren't biased.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to create a setup where if it's true, it can be dealt with properly. We've seen too often if there's a purely internal, we'll check into this in a ministry, it kind of gets swept under the rug. I mean, I hate to say it, but we've all seen those stories break in the press, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And no matter how small it is, it appears an investigation is good. Like you say, it could be a 15-minute investigation. At least you kind of head things off at the pass in terms of knowing what really is going on in the allegation, and then you can shape your response to it. Every parent knows that, right?
Mm-hmm. And and like with your kids, if someone's been harmed, you know, Johnny slugs Billy in the home, well, that's the first harm. Billy's hurt. But the second harm is if the parents are like, "Oh, don't bother me with that," or "Oh, that didn't really happen. I haven't got time for that." And it's the same thing in the ministries or the churches. If someone has been harmed by someone and they try to talk about it and they get oh no, Reverend so and so never would do that, or we, in a sense, we just can't be bothered with you, that just creates so much more harm. And this is where people lose their faith, slide into lifelong trauma. I mean, I just can't even describe the depth, the pain that people feel when the church does not respond well to the allegations. So if you care at all about the sheep that you're pastoring, you have to respond well, because these are the sheep that are being hurt, and you'll hurt them more if you don't. So You can tell I'm pretty passionate about this, but for the sake of the people and the sake of living up to Christ's calling for the church, this is super important.
I'm speaking with Teresa Lynn Sidebotham, who is the author of Handling Allegations in a Ministry, Responses and Investigations. She's the founder of Teleus Law, and also the Teleus Teaches, which gives you advice for whatever range of things that may be going on in your ministry, in your church. And actually, Teresa, what you're talking about can be very, very helpful to Christians in business, whether it's secular business or whatever, just Christians who are wanting to comport well with what the Bible says in terms of running their own business and getting people to get along with each other.
Well, absolutely, because the book is talking about best practices and responses and investigations, and I add the ministry layer, but the underlying practical approach is very similar in the business world as well.
Sure. Now let's talk about outside allegations. And this happens especially with churches where you let a group use your church facilities, and then another group you won't allow to use your church facilities, those kinds of things. Lawsuits brought by outside interests. You hear more and more talk within Christian church circles that we're being persecuted by the society around us, and so you really got to be careful when you do this and that, because you're opening yourself to a lawsuit. Address some of those things, if you would.
So churches and ministries are definitely under attack from the outside culture, in the sense that there's interest groups trying to pressure them to change their theology or compromise with things they're morally opposed to. So here we get into constitutional law, into the religious liberties arena, where thankfully ministries in America have a huge First Amendment right to practice what they believe, church autonomy to make decisions about ecclesiastical stuff in general. And so to prevent that type of lawsuit, and we do some of this type of work too, but it's important to have policies in place, and policies and procedures that define what does the church stand for, how will it use its facilities, what does it hold to, what does it not hold to, and then when that's clear, the church can stand on that and defend lawsuits. Some important tips for this type of lawsuit that you should be aware of. At least one insurance company, Brotherhood Mutual, has special policies in place for this type of defense of religious liberties issues. And I highly recommend that you be on board with that. And then the public interest law firms, groups like Thomas More Society, Pacific Justice Institute, Alliance Defending Freedom, and some other great ones. They are doing some amazing work in this field, defending the religious liberties of individuals and ministries. The other big prong of the attack on the church, I think, is this whole area of misconduct. The allegations of child abuse issues, sexual harassment, any other type of misconduct. Sometimes the two can overlap. They tend to fall into those two different areas.
Tell us about Teleus Law now specifically. You let us know what's going on with a very, very good book, and I've said it again. I will say it again. I really recommend anybody in leadership in the church or a ministry to read that book. Tell us what your services are with Tellius Law.
So on the nonprofit ministry side, we do quite a bit of work helping, get the right policies in place, help organizations tee up what they believe in, make sure that they're legally compliant, work through all kinds of employment issues about, what are their ministers allowed to do, what can their staff do, handling personnel problems. So we have that, straight legal services working through stuff. And then we also have the section of the firm where we do a lot of these external investigations. So we'll come in and be an independent third-party investigator. And in that case, our task is to find out the truth and also to help the organization respond well to everybody in the situation, caring for people who've been harmed, doing justice to people who've been accused, maybe the reconciliation work. So that's a somewhat different legal task that we do. And it's very exciting because first there's truth, and then we say, okay, how can the Lord bring healing out of this?
Yeah, right. How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way from the standpoint of Tellius Law?
You just go to the Tellius Law website, telliuslaw.com, and you'll see contact information there, both phone numbers and emails. So it's pretty easy to reach us that way.
Okay,
And we end up working not just in Colorado, but nationally and internationally because, as you can tell, this is a bit specialized compared to a lot of law firms.
sure. Tellius, by the way, is spelled Telios. Tellius, Tellius Law. And the online training for ministries that we've spoke about earlier is telliusteaches.com, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And
Okay,
for anyone who wonders, the word teleos is a Greek word from the New Testament that means whole or complete or mature. It's the be perfect word. So we're trying to hold in front of ourselves and our clients both what is God calling us to? How do we grow up into that vision?
we get our word telescope from that word, so we're telescoping to completion and to wholeness. And I think that that's very apt. Again, the book is Handling Allegations in a Ministry, Responses and Investigations. And I've gushed enough about how important this book is. Check it out for yourself. On this video, you can actually purchase this at the end of the video. Or, Teresa, it's available, what, just about everywhere, is it?
Just about everywhere that, I'm not sure about the bookstores that you walk into, but certainly the online outlets, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and the others. So you can go online and purchase either the paperback copy or Kindle, I think they have as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate very, very much your joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be asked. Thank you.